Hello, my name is Pini Debask, and today we will talk about how Foglet Performance Investigator can help you solve the mysteries of your database performance. This is the first part of this webcast series. Let's start with some quick introductions about myself. Uh, I'm a product manager for database monitoring solutions with Quest. I'm based in Israel. My technical background is mainly Oracle databases. I've been an Oracle DBA since 2006. I'm an Oracle certified professional. In my free time, I do public speaking. I presented sessions at Oracle Open World, IOG Collaborate, and other events. I'm running my blog where I write about my experiences of working with databases. And you can find below my email address, LinkedIn account, and Twitter. So if you would like to contact me, you would be more than welcome. Okay, so let's talk for a second about the agenda for today's presentation. We will start this session by reviewing who is the modern DBA, what are the main challenges of today's DBAs. We will talk about some common mysteries of database performance problems. We will see what Forget for Databases is and how it can provide huge value to DBAs. We will see how to address some common performance challenges using Forget Performance Investigator. So let's start by reviewing who is the modern DBA. Okay, so in this picture, we can see today's DBA. He looks very happy, he's smiling, but this picture could be misleading. And the reason for that is because today's DBAs are under pressure. Unlike 10 years ago, when DBAs were required to support only one database flavor, it could be Oracle, SQL Server, or maybe two database flavors, today's DBAs are required to support and manage multiple database platforms and editions. They need to adjust to changing technology. It's no longer only commercial relational databases, it's also open source relational databases. In addition, there are new database technologies, new trends such as the non-relational databases, aka the NoSQL solutions. The cloud trend is also very popular, so DBAs are required to support databases from different locations, both on-premise and in the cloud, and they need to deliver top performance and stability to their entire environment, which could be very challenging nowadays with the new technologies. Here we can see the results of a recent survey that we did, which included over 300 respondents from different industries. Based on this survey, 72% of DBAs replied that number of databases they are responsible for is increasing. 70% of DBAs consider performance to be their most important responsibility. And also 65% of respondents see cloud as having a major impact on their role. So this slide really emphasizes the challenges of today's DBA that we discussed in the previous slide. Let's talk about Forget for Databases. Forget for Databases is a heterogeneous solution for monitoring your entire environment across various database flavors from a single view. This solution supports SQL Server, Oracle, DB2, SAP ASC, MySQL, Postgres, MongoDB, and Cassandra. It is a 24 by 7 enterprise monitoring solution which allows you to effectively monitor your database environments. It features deep resource monitoring capabilities with powerful analysis tools to quickly identify issues and proactively fix them before they become a real problem. It also offers in-context and enterprise reports. This solution supports all database editions and it works remotely with a remote agentless architecture. It works with all database configurations from anywhere. It can support databases both on-premise and in the cloud. Here we can see the rich monitoring coverage that we support with Oracle, with Forget for Oracle. So it supports all the various disaster recovery and high availability solutions such as DataGuard, RAC, Arman, etc. All storage aspects, automatic storage management, the fast recovery area, table spaces and data files, redo logs, objects. Um, it supports recent technology, so we have full coverage for 12c pluggable databases, aka multi-tenant architecture, as well as Exadata machines from both current and historical standpoints. We also have a very rich monitoring coverage for SQL Server. You can basically name any database feature in SQL Server and we support it. We also have a complete coverage for all the BI solutions. So we support SQL Server, integration services, reporting services, and analysis services as part of Forgetful SQL Server. Let's talk about some common database performance mysteries. The first challenge would be how can I, as a DBA, detect abnormal workload activity which impacts my database performance? With Foglight, we have a very smart baseline algorithm that can tell you the expected baseline range, the expected database behavior at any point in time. So here, if you click on the quick view, as you can see the arrow points to, it shows you the baseline for the various system utilization metrics. So for example, you can see the CPU load baseline, the memory baseline, and the disk percentage busy baseline. It can also show you the workload, the database workload activity baseline, and whether the database activity has been deviated from the expected baseline range, which is being calculated based on a very specific point in time. So it's sensitive to different time periods, such as hour in a day, day in a week in a month, and so on. This is Forget Performance Investigator screen, and here you can see some charts that shows you the baseline, which is the gray area um, in the background. And you can see also that there is the blue color in the blue line in the middle that shows the actual workload activity, the actual average active sessions. And as you can see, there is no baseline deviation because the blue line is within the baseline range. The next challenge that I would like to discuss is how can I, as a DBA, easily understand who are the most DB time consumers. So which SQL statements consumed most of the database workload, who are the users that were connected and executed the top SQL statements, etc. So let's talk about SQL PI, which stands for SQL Performance Investigator. It is an analysis toolset for deep visibility into database performance. It is part of Foglight for Oracle and SQL Server. It's a web-based tool. It has a simplified deployment because it uses a remote agentless architecture that doesn't require to install anything on the monitored host and doesn't require to install any database schema objects on the monitored databases. It also supports all the database editions and configurations. So for example, you can monitor enterprise edition, standard edition, etc. Here we can see a Forget Performance Investigator screen, and what you can see in the middle is a breakdown chart of all the resources that are being used by the database activity. So for example, it could be CPU activity, user I/O activity, application locks, concurrency issues such as latches in the database, and in the left section of the screen, you can see the performance tree, which is basically a breakdown of dimensions, whereas each dimension is a presentation of a specific session activity. For example, the SQL statement that the session was executing, the program that the session was connected from, the DB user of this session, the file, the data file or the temp file that was accessed by the session, the disk, the object, etc. So in this case, we can see all the SQL statements which were executed by a program Toad that is running under user sales. And this breakdown of various dimensions of multiple, we call it combination of dimensions, is available from both current and historical standpoints. Let's see an example of how all the statistics and weight events which are associated to the selected dimension or combination of dimensions. In this case, we can see a breakdown of all the sessions which are uniquely identified by the session identifier, the SID, and also the serial number in Oracle. In SQL Server, we identified by the SID and the logon time. Workload activity highlights. This is a very powerful tool which allows you to see how much time the instance spent on the various resources. So for example, without any efforts, without any deep investigation, it can immediately tell you that this instance consumed 77% of its time waiting for application locks. And if you hover on the weight, it displays a tooltip with additional information that explains what each one of the resources or application or weights are associated to. In this case, application weights are resulting from user application code, for example, lock weights, which caused by row level locking or explicit lock commands. You can also filter the activity highlights by specific resource. So in this case, we filter it by CPU, and all the information that we get is filtered by CPU. So we can see the top SQL statements that consumed CPU, the top PL/SQL block in Oracle, T-SQL blocks in SQL Server. We can see the top programs, users, databases, etc. You can also filter the activity highlights by dimensions. So in this case, I chose the sales user, the sales database user, and then all the information about the activity highlights will be filtered by that user. In this case, the user sales consumed only 4% of the instance total database time, which is not a lot. And we can also see that 91% of its time spent on using CPU activity. We can see also the SQL statements that that user executed in the program. So the activity highlights is basically a very easy way to understand what's happening from a database workload perspective without investing any efforts. Next challenge, how can I, as a DBA, resolve performance degradation due to blocking lock issues? Blocking lock issues is a very common problem when the application is written poorly, and in some cases due to concurrent access to the same shared resources. It could be either tables, indexes, partitions. There might be some sessions which are waiting for locks. So using Forget Performance Investigator, you can very easily understand what is happening from that perspective. We have the locked objects dimension that shows you all the objects which wait for lock. In this case, we can see the table test lock, employee, and product. You can also drill down to various dimensions using PI. So in this case, we can see which SQL statements under a specific program that was waiting for a specific object. In this case, it's sales.employee. So we can see an update statement, update employee, set first name, blah, blah, blah. You can see that statement running under user sales, under and accessing object employee. And that SQL statement is running under program Toad. So it really gives all the information we need to understand what's happening from a log perspective. And another very cool feature is the blocking history tab. It shows you historical information about locking trees. So you can see who locked who, when, why, what was the duration of the lock, what was the SQL statement that is waiting for the lock, in which database, etc. We can also filter the blocking history tab. So in this case, I filtered all the log trees by a specific database, OLTP. Now, all information that I will see about the log trees, the historical log trees, is filtered by that database. So you can see who logged who, when, why, what was the duration of the log, but for a specific database, which is OLTP. At the same manner, I could choose any other database activity. Next challenge, how can I, as a DBA, identify performance degradation due to excessive I/O activity? In this case, we can see Forget Performance Investigator, and we will focus on the I/O related dimension. So we provide information about files which were accessed, and there were some I/O activity related to those files, disks, and objects. It could be temp files, data files in the case of files. In case of disk, it could be either regular file system, or in the case of Oracle, we also support automatic storage management. And also in terms of objects, as mentioned, we support tables, indexes, and partitions. In this case, we can see information about all the I/O related statistics for the various objects. We can see, for example, the block changes, the logical reads, physical writes, and all the objects are ordered by the I/O wait time. Next challenge, how can I, as a DBA, correlate between database performance degradation and changes in my environment? So for example, maybe I would like to understand as a DBA that the reason for an increase in activity of I/O is due to an index that has been dropped. So let's see it using Forget Performance Investigator. In this case, we can see the workload activity chart. You can see the breakdown at the top of the screen. And in the right section, you can see the various categories of changes, such as execution plan changes, configuration changes, could be either parameter changes or file changes, schema changes. For example, index was dropped, table was modified, system configuration. So for example, if CPU or memory was added or was removed from the machine, and user defined, you can also create your own user defined changes. Each category of changes is being represented by a specific color. So you can see the execution plan is being represented by the orange color, configuration by the blue color, etc. And every time we find a change, we indicate it on the workload chart. So it allows you to visualize and correlate between changes in the actual workload. In this case, we found new execution plans. We found two jobs which were modified, and we found two disks which have been created. Next challenge is how can I, as a DBA, easily understand execution plans of both SQL statements and batches. Forget Performance Investigator collects execution plan, stores them, and displays them. In this case, we can see plan details of a specific execution plan. We can see all the operations, the objects which accessed by the execution plan. In this case, we can see two indexes. We can also see the associated statistics such as cost, CPU cost, I/O cost, and other statistics. We also aggregate the statistics per each operation which appears in the execution plan. In this case, we can see that hash join totally consumed 41% of the execution plan cost, as well as aggregation of all the objects statistics. So in this case, we can see two indexes. We can see that each one of them consumed 50% of the activity. And if we click on one of the objects, we will get a pop-up with additional information, such as the time that the object created, last time that was analyzed, which is very important because as we know, once we gather statistics, optimizer statistics, then the optimizer decisions might be impacted by the new updated statistics. We can see the last DDL time and various metrics that are relevant to each one of the objects, which could be either tables or indexes. So for example, in the case of Oracle, we can see that there are some very useful metrics such as clustering factor of the index, number of blocks, number of leaf blocks, number of rows, the depth of the index. We can see the size, distinct keys, and other very useful parameters. Next challenge, also related to execution plans, is how can I, as a DBA, understand performance degradation due to execution plan changes? Forget Performance Investigator not only collects execution plans, stores them historically in the repository, it can also show you comparison between executions of the same SQL statement or batch. In this case, we can see two execution plans, and as you can see, we highlight the changes. So for example, in the left execution plan, we can see the red color that says operation changed, and we can see that the optimizer chose table access full operation. Whereas in the right execution plan, we can see that the optimizer chose index fast full scan. So this is a really easy way to compare between execution plans. Next challenge is how can I, as a DBA, compare between production and test environments? This is a very useful use case, especially nowadays in the DevOps era. We have several environments. We would like to make sure that the performance, the configuration is identical. So how can I do that? How can I do that using Forget Performance Investigator? Here we see a way to compare between instances or dimensions. So for example, I can choose to compare between production and test environments as mentioned, and we can also choose to compare between one SQL statement to another, between users, programs, databases, etc. So in this case, we can see two colors. Each one represents a different instance. We can see the green color shows a pretty stable workload activity with an average of 4 sessions per second. Whereas the other instance, which is being represented by the gray color, uh, almost has no activity at all, but we do see that in the beginning of the comparison, roughly at 2:40 p.m., we can see there was a peak in the workload activity, which reached over 12 sessions per second. In the bottom of the screen, we can see various statistics that we can compare between those two instances or dimension. For example, the active time, number of executions, number of sorts, etc. If we would like to compare between configuration parameters, we can do that as well. This is a very important use case, as mentioned, where we want to compare between different environments. In Oracle, it could be also useful in case of RAC. So if I have several instances in the same RAC environment, and I would like to make sure that several parameters are identical, I can do that using Forget Performance Investigator. So here we can see a list of all the parameters and an indication whether the parameters are identical or different. If you would like to filter this list only by the parameters which are different, we'll click on the button, and then we will see only the parameters which are different. So in this case, we can see, for example, that in one instance, the CPU count equals to 8, whereas in the other instance, the CPU count is 4. The last challenge for today's presentation is which steps should I as a DBA take in order to tune the database performance. Forget Performance Investigator for both Oracle and SQL Server features the advisories um, capability, which basically tell you as a DBA which action items you should take, what you should implement in order to improve the database performance. It could be a recommendation for object changes, parameter changes, etc. In this case, we can see the workload deviation baseline that shows you that there was an increased activity of the workload, and that caused a deviation in the expected baseline range. And also we can see the top SQL statement which caused IO activity and how you can address the problem and basically speed up the entire database performance by creating the indexes which are missing. We also provide you the command to execute in order to create the index. So this is one example of advisory, but as mentioned, the product features various advisories that you can use in order to improve the database performance. If you would like to learn more about the product, feel free to visit our website. You can also download a free trial and play with the tool. We also have a free online course available on ToadWorld, our database community website. Thank you very much for attending today's presentation and hope to see you again in the next episode of this webcast series.